Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm at the European Commission with a man whose work goes to the very heart of what the EU sees as its core values. Michael McGrath is the Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, the Rule of Law and Consumer Protection. He's involved in the various rule of law issues surrounding countries such as Hungary and Slovakia, but also much of his work has to do with the whole online dimension, whether that's about protecting people's data and privacy or defending the rights of consumers in the European single market. Michael McGrath is a prominent politician in Ireland, where he was Minister for Finance in 2022 to 24 before being nominated to his current post here in Brussels. He's from Fianna Fáil, which is traditionally seen as a centre-left party in Ireland. Welcome to Talking Europe, Commissioner.
Thank you, Armin.
Obviously, you're dealing with rule of law inside the EU, but in the context of the war in the Middle East, there's a lot of discussion about international law now. And as you know, France and Spain have been saying that the US-Israeli attacks on Iran are and were outside international law. What is your position on that?
Well, ultimately, it is for the international courts to give a definitive determination on that legal question. But I think we have to remember here the absolute brutality of the Iranian regime and the brutality that they have perpetrated on their own people over many decades, including in recent weeks and in recent months. There is an obligation on all parties now to this conflict to behave in a responsible way, to minimise civilian damage and casualties. It is appalling to see innocent lives being lost, and that must be avoided at all costs. And ultimately, the outcome that we want to see here as a European Union is a system of governance in Iran that meets the needs of the Iranian people, that they can be better served and better supported by a new form of government. Ideally, we would like to see a democratic government, but a form of government that meets their needs and treats them in a far better and more humane way than the current Iranian regime has been doing for a long time.
Just as a quick follow-up on that, we've seen Europe finding it difficult to speak with one voice, for example, on Gaza or other international situations. And now we have a similar situation with France and Spain on one side, Germany clearly closer to the Trump administration. I just wonder, what do you think of that split? Is it a bad look for the European Union?
Well, the position of the EU treaties is clear on that point. When it comes to the common foreign and security policy, it is determined on the basis of unanimity at European Council level. So it's not for the European Commission or the External Action Service to arrive at a policy position and represent the European Union. It is led by the member states, and we have to be given a mandate to represent and reflect that body of opinion. But of course, on any significant international issue, it is difficult to achieve unanimity, and that is the reality that we face. So we speak about our values, our principles, the need for full respect for international law and the UN Charter, and we will continue to do so.
Speaking of the EU's values, of course, there's been this persistent tension between Brussels and the Hungarian government, and indeed EU funds for Hungary that were in the form of grants and loans have been frozen to a figure of around 18 billion euros. And in fact, Hungary has permanently lost 1.04 billion euros in 2024. The Commission, Michael McGrath, as well as the EU Council, have both been criticised at points by the European Parliament or by civil society campaigners for not taking decisive enough action against Hungary. Do you agree with that? Do you think you've been too much focused on dialogue and not enough on other procedures?
Well, dialogue is important, but it has to lead to positive results, and we have engaged on a continuous basis with the Hungarian authorities. We have set out in our annual Rule of Law report last July our appraisal of the current situation, which overall is not a positive evaluation. Unfortunately, we have taken multiple infringement proceedings and a number of significant judgments are expected in the period ahead from the Court of Justice. We have the Article 7 procedure that was triggered by the European Parliament back in 2018, but the Council remains in the ownership of that particular process, may decide or not decide to take the next step. We do have to strike a balance, but we have hard tools, which we have used and will continue to use where we see rule of law not being respected, because it's not an optional extra within the European Union. Rule of law and respect for it is a binding obligation of EU membership.
Hungary isn't the only country. Slovakia, of course, is in the spotlight, and the Commission has launched infringement proceedings against the Slovak government as well because of the constitutional amendments that were made there and the whistleblowers law. Yes. Have you seen, though, any change in the attitude or behaviour of the Slovak authorities in response to those infringement proceedings, or are they just going on as usual?
We have received responses from the Slovak authorities in relation to those 2 letters of formal notice, which constitute the initiation of an infringement process. We are considering those replies that we have received. And of course, action and positive movement is what we actually need to see in order for us to change our position. And we remain open for dialogue and engagement with the Slovak authorities. There is a way back. There is a way to address and repair these issues.
Let's talk a bit about the Democracy Shield and the Centre for Democratic Resilience, which is a new centre that you're running. Of course, the Commission is very concerned about foreign interference, and there are some key elections coming up in Denmark and Hungary, for instance. What particular kinds of interference are you expecting or anticipating, and what are the tools that you're going to use if you see that?
Well, I'm very pleased that the new Centre for Democratic Resilience is now up and running, and with the full support of the Member States of the European Union, and that should be acknowledged. And its central purpose really is to act as a hub, as a point of coordination, to join the dots, to join together all of the good work that is happening within the institutions and also at Member State level. The truth is that the nature of the threat that we do face is one that does not respect borders. We know that there has been a foreign interference in elections in Europe. We also know that with the power of technology, the ability to spread disinformation, the extraordinary power of artificial intelligence, for example, does present real challenges for our democracy. So we are going to work together now to address all of these issues and make sure that the Member States are well equipped to protect and defend their own democratic systems.
I was going to mention artificial intelligence because it's been said that the Democracy Shield, like the Digital Services Act and the AI Act, that none of them really were designed to keep up with the pace of the changes. For example, now we see chatbots influencing people's opinions, telling them that there are different views about what's happening in Ukraine or Greenland, for example. Are the tools actually falling behind the real pace of change?
Well, I believe we have the most extensive set of tools globally for dealing with these issues. And I think the very examples that you highlight underline the need for guardrails and for regulatory parameters when it comes to the extraordinary power of technology and in particular AI. And we need to keep it under review. And if we need to do more, then we have to be willing to make such proposals. But we do have a very strong toolbox, including support for free and independent media, support for civil society, for independent justice systems. All of these are essential foundations of a free, open and democratic society. And we need to continue to invest in them.
You've suggested an EU-wide approach to protecting children and teenagers online. Australia, of course, has taken what some would say are quite draconian measures and saying that children under 16 cannot be on social media. Should EU member states go down that same road, do you think?
We have seen a number of announcements and heard of a number of initiatives that are member state led. I do think, insofar as possible, it would be better to have a joined up, coordinated approach across the European Union. As you know, President von der Leyen has established a panel of experts. They have met for the first time this week. They will be reporting to the Commission in the months ahead on the question of social media and young people, and that question of whether or not hard age restrictions are appropriate or even would work. We have an open mind. We have not ruled out any EU-wide initiative at this stage. What I will be doing within my own portfolio is including a number of measures to better protect children online as part of the Digital Fairness Act that I will bring forward later on this year.
Yeah, I wanted to ask quickly about privacy issues as well, the privacy of European citizens. And I believe you've said that we've already reached the limit of what we can do with the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, in terms of simplifying it. In other words, if it was simplified even more, that might actually compromise the privacy of users. Can you just explain that a little bit for us?
I think we should be very proud of the high standard of personal data protection that we have within the European Union. It is the global standard in many respects, and we have a number of international agreements now whereby other countries recognise that very high standard of EU data protection. We need to protect it. It's also an obligation that we have within the EU treaties and within the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Of course, there is a balance to be struck. That's why we have brought forward some very targeted amendments to the GDPR in the recent digital omnibus to allow the use of personal data in certain limited and restricted circumstances for AI, for example. And we have to ensure we do get the balance right between supporting innovation and at the same time protecting personal privacy.
Because on the digital omnibus, precisely, there were big concerns, as you know, from various activists saying this was going to be a big rollback in fundamental rights of citizens. You don't think that these future changes are going to be basically this kind of omnibus simplification steamroller just rolling over the remaining protections that Europeans have?
No, I don't. I'm satisfied that what we have proposed here is a set of quite narrow and targeted amendments to the GDPR that have been heavily influenced by case law, so from judgments that we have from the Court of Justice and also opinions that we have from the European Data Protection Board. So we have to continue to get the balance right and defend that fundamental right of all EU citizens to the protection of their personal data.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being my guest, Commissioner Michael McGrath.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Armin, and merci beaucoup.
And that's all for this edition of Talking Europe. Glad you could join us here on France 24.